Welcome back to Global News, where we bring to you exclusive live things that you need to know, topics that are interesting and important. And today we are going to go over reparations. And I have here my co host, Rebecca, and we're going to go over this topic and we're gonna see why this is important. We've been hearing about these topics lately on the news and members of Congress and other places as well, but you don't hear about it more often. It's usually written somewhere or something of that effect. So right now we have here Rebecca. Rebecca, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thank you for having me. First off, it is a joy to be here today and to be talking with you. So just to put that out there. And reparation is not something that you hear often. So that is unique to our discussion about it today and any day that we do talk about it. So I, have a perspective, but I would like to hear from you more on what exactly is reparation from the way you are seeing things.
Yes.
And then I can go from there.
Okay, well, I can tell you that reparations have always been around, and it's now being at the forefront in the new millennium. In the new millennium, where a time has come where we see this gap in income, employment, resources, as well as positions, and other things as well. So,
Well, I guess you had mentioned it being more possibly
Kindle.
something we hear about, but people don't talk about it. We may have heard about reparations in some circles. If
Kindle.
you are following those things, then yeah, you would have heard
Kindle.
about reparation, but it's not something that's talked about. So I guess that's really the point of this discussion and post and podcast. But even those circles, I think, in Congress that are looking at that have dismissed it in many ways. And so I don't hear them talking about it, nowadays, even though it is a recent thing that's come up from the protesting to the George Floyd incidences, multiple things, multiple events that occurred 2 years ago, and then of course we're living through the coming through of the COVID death tolls, and but more specifically with some of the events that occurred 2 years ago, with some of the protesting and the taking it out to the streets and the violence in the United States concerning the treatment of specifically the blacks in the United States. So if that's what it is, then that may be why Congress has seen it come through, but they dismissed it quickly because they felt that maybe it was another way for them to just spread more violence, and that it wasn't quite at their level, sort of. And so they quickly dismissed it, and then it's not such of a topic of discussion. But not to say it's not something important for them to discuss, but that's what they have done. And then, then you're left with maybe people like yourself that are still holding these feelings and want to discuss it or talk about it, and wonder why, like myself, I just wonder why it's not something that's talked about, because I don't hear about it in many circles.
A number of things. For one, how do we tie in all the protests and all the non-violent or violent, for that matter, protests into reparations? Well, we know that it is two different aspects. If we look at it from the perspective of will reparation induce or influence violence? No, I don't think that is it from an aspect of the definition of it. All right, so reparations here states that the making of amends for a wrong one has done by paying money to otherwise helping those who have been wronged. So the backdrop to the wrong would be the slave work or unpaid work that many minorities, mainly brown and black minorities, who have worked in forced labors. We know some of the stories that depicts this in a sense of the history of the United States. So it's documented, so we don't have to look far from that factual. So with that being said, there's been a big gap that has occurred in those things that I mentioned earlier in the show, which is employment, income, position, as well as other social classifications. And we see, when you look at the big picture, what do we see? We see corporate, and we see big businesses, and we see officials and lawmaking to other things. And when you look across the board, these individuals are looked at as higher in pay grade, scale, so on and so forth. And then they are in charge of what we would call the system that is utilized to obtain these positions, these businesses, so on and so forth. For an example, we just went and looked at getting a loan the other day, right? Well, there's a system in place for that, right? You got to check all the box to get approved. As doing research with my oldest daughter, we were researching South America, and we found out that it is a high poverty area there in Brazil, and due to it is the land discrimination. And so when you look at that and you tie that back to being approved for a mortgage to buy a home. Well, we traveled the country from coast to coast, manifest destiny, and we've saw how much land that is there from the east to the west coast. And most of it is not even being occupied. So there's plenty of land, but the question is, how is it being multiplied, distributed? Well, there's a system in place that grants, gives, and approves where building projects are being built from businesses to homes, and then those who are operating these applications for that. So there's a huge gap in home ownership, the job market or field, whether it's industrial to corporate, whatever that may be, and then as far as the business and technologies aspect. So when you look at the bottom of that, right, you have that, and then you have the gap, and then at the bottom, what do you see? You see brown and black people struggling to get out of that situation, and it's on a larger scale, and they end up either going to jail, doing something indecent to support their family, household, whether it may be selling drugs, whatever these things may be. That is not about nothing, because we know where all that ends. Well, there's some avenues to them to make a living in large amounts. We know what those are. We know it's sports. We know it's music, and that's pretty much it. And
Well, I don't know about that, because when you
Tell
take
us
a
about
look at the culture, and then just to kind of speak a little bit on something earlier, so reparations would then cover all peoples,
Kendall.
because in every culture in the United States, there is a need for offering, a compensation for work done. And so you could break it down like you did, and that's good when you look at it from there's the corporate, then there's the job market, and then there's the communities that support pretty much everything. But when you look at browns or blacks in the United States, no, I mean, a lot of people depict them or stereotype lots of cultures. And so blacks and the brown community is no different. So they get labeled, and oftentimes it may be, sure, you may have that, but you have that in every culture. You may not see it as often in different cultures, just due to location. And so then you've got other factors and things that come in that affect those cultures and also communities, because most of the blacks in the United States make up a majority of impoverished communities or areas. But even so, that doesn't necessarily mean an impoverished community, no matter where it is, and including the United States, doesn't necessarily mean that that it's drug infested
Kendall.
people, or drug infested. It can, and it probably has it, but that's not all that's going on in that community or that culture. And so people in the United States have to be able to look at the whole culture, not just the bits and pieces, even though those can seem can seem and become emphasized, but they do more. So, when they do come up out of those communities, the ones that do rise above or come out of it, I would say they make their biggest contributions in music, yeah, and entertainment, the entertainment industry, and actually, they do uncommon, or how would you say, like you wouldn't think they would be in certain areas of government, but they actually are. And when they do those things, because they have risen above, because they have gone through their communities that are often impoverished to get where they are, in life and in the United States, they are well prepared. They're how do you say, they're well, I guess in many ways well versed, but they're veterans by the time they get to where they are. And there's a term, but I'm missing that right now. But
Okay, so let's look at some numbers. Okay, okay,
and so, if they're in government, they do well, with whatever they're in, because they had to go through, being, a part of, and a major part of an impoverished community. They had to go through that if they are in those positions, or get into those. So, and
okay,
that's just on the individual level, and how they decided, hey, look, I'm
okay,
not going to stay in this poverty. I'm going to get out of it. And that's with any culture and any peoples, and any individual. So, that's how I see it. And that's that's pretty much how it is, because if you were to talk one-on-one with that person, they would probably tell you, a whole lot that they've been through just based on the fact that they are black or brown.
okay.
So,
So with that being said, right, let's look at some
in the
numbers.
United States.
In the United States, there's approximately about 42 million black people in America. So that includes men, women, and children. Okay, that's a small number. So, and we look at today's aspect and we're talking about reparation, right? Now, 42 million people that are black in America claims for reparation, right? Okay, we know that who would be responsible for distributing that once it is passed in Congress,
You
right?
said how many
There's
reparations?
42
42 million
million brown
that
black people
that claim.
that would be subject to claiming reparations,
Okay.
because they would all be
Well,
some form of descendant from the slaves here in
what
America.
about, because we're speaking on reparations, what about, because that's just one factor,
Uh-huh.
that you're looking at within an individual. What about, gender? What about other
Okay.
races? What
So
about
here's
circumstances?
here's the other thing, right?
What about,
So
immigrants?
so since
Like first year
brown
immigrants,
people,
or
since
first generation immigrants.
since black people, and I don't like to use that term. To me, black is derogatory. I would like to use people of color because it's a variety, right? But when we look at people of color, they are taking the lead and holding the torch to civil, moral, and other aspects of humanity. And so, yes, you're going to have other genders and differences getting falling into place. while they take the lead for these type of demands or whatever they may be, because that's usually who's always taking the lead with it being done to. So everybody else just fall in place. But here's the question: do we compete with those individuals and try to get in front of them because of their gender or some other aspect? When we look at the documentation of treatment, okay, it's documented. So the question would be how
When you
the
say
procedure.
compete, I guess you would be sort of
That's what
implying that
happens.
there's a limited, that reparations would be limited.
So with that being said,
And
right,
and
everyone wants to be treated equally
when
when
we're
we're talking
talking
about
about
gender.
paying money, right? We're talking paying money to those
Mucho dinero.
who feel or have been done wrong by the United States government.
And there's a
And
list.
that crosses all peoples, all genders,
Well, we're gonna leave
and
this specific to the gaps, right? That slavery has
all
caused,
ages.
right? We're gonna just keep it at we're gonna focus on the aspects of what slavery done for America, and we're gonna look at the good things and the bad things. We're gonna look at the pros and the cons. We're gonna look at everything, how things were evolved, how families were moved around, so on and so forth. That still happens in another aspect, and at the end of the day, if it's all about money, then this is how the conversation occur. Now, other people, genders or whoever, could make a case for that situation, but it probably won't tie in to this because this is a whole nother different case in that aspect. And they've already started talking about it, but we need to talk about it more. And that's why we're doing this right now here. If you're just tuning in, Global News Podcast, I'm here with co-host Rebecca, and we are going over reparations and the importance of how this needs to occur ASAP. Not to mention, we have other things that's going on in the world. We have the war with Ukraine and Russia, and the different aspects of how China and other countries are getting involved in different ways that could possibly lead to a World War III and take and change the world in the way we know it right now. So it's very important to stay focused because there's a lot of changes that are occurring. And right now, as we speak, there's people suffering right now over in the others, in the old world, the other side of the world. And uh, we are comfortable here, but there's other people that is not doing so good. So as we look at the whole, we must always recognize and pay attention to everything that's going on. But for now, you want to tell a little everyone about your background, Rebecca, your nationality, where you from, and you know how you come to know about reparation. And that's interesting because you are Caucasian or Europe descent. You're not, a person of color.
Well, yes, I prefer to identify myself as just born here in the United States, Native American in that sense, and that's a whole nother topic with me as far as my Native American blood and roots. But I do see myself, and as well as anyone who has been born here in the United States as Native, like a Native American. And we all do. I think I am just starting on my genealogy research, so I've only barely touched the surface on my, you know, my roots here, but
So
you
what
know,
school?
I come with a certain percent, I'll just put it that way, of Native American blood, and then the other half of me is European.
Yes.
But my European blood is um, is also mixed. So I have Irish, English, and German.
So what are you studying right now? You're going to school. What are you studying? What do you plan on doing after you finish school? And how would that apply to contributing to, you know,
And I also have
the United States?
Canadian. So, but I mean, I still see it as that I'm just native to the land here. Uh, and I grew up, you know, in the southern part of the United States, so you know, not so good. But you know, good for some things, not so good for some things. Being the gender that I am, so I've seen things that were unjust, just being from the South. And I was, you know, also exposed, not experienced, but exposed to what my parents told me was their experience with segregation in the schools.
So
So
what school
all
are
of
you
these things,
attending?
you know, all of these things, coupled with my own experiences as a young girl in the public schools growing up in the United States and in the South, um, help me you know, to understand the things that are that have occurred in my lifetime in regards to race or even reparations, and the things, the current events, because you know, I have felt that the United States has been, whether known or not, in a state of war from the time, you know, never not been in some kind of war, whether it be civilly or overseas.
So would you like to tell everyone what you're studying in school and
And all of that has affected me, you know, being a you know, a citizen and or civilian, civilian life, and growing up and everything. But you know, to answer your questions more fully, you know, growing up, it was always important. It was the one thing that kept me, even when things weren't so good in my community or even my, you know, my neighborhood or whatever growing up, was the fact that I was raised to value education. And that was, I think, the thing for me, that in a lot of ways, one of the things I'll just say that saved me in many ways, because you know, when I got to be, you know, a teenager, I was doing this thing where I would be, you know, delinquent from school and running away and from home, and you know, those things put me at risk. But you know, with the value that was instilled as a young child, I was able to always come through education. Another area that sort of like saved me from the risks that I was putting upon myself, or that I was exposed to, was music. So, that's how I view when I see impoverished areas in America. I view it as, well, you have, all cultures that have both poor and have both the poor and the wealthy. And in particular, if you were to look at one of the peoples being blacks or browns in the United States, what is something that we have all in common? What is something that all peoples in the United States? And I think music kind of wins that, but that's just my perspective of it, But yeah, so my biggest thing was growing up having a value in my education, and it didn't really matter my schooling, but my education did. So I wanted to
you're
make sure
studying right now.
that those two were kept in perspective: my schooling and my education.
And what are you studying now?
And now, I guess, because of those values instilled at an early age, I could have easily, not done anything with it, but I ended up taking what I did from my psychology and taking it into education. So once I got to college and I started doing better or well with my studies, and I was in a field of study, and really a professional field, then I was able to take that and go a little bit further and take it into the field of education.
So right now you're studying your, what is it called?
But now, then, after that step was taken, I took it into, I don't know what our time is like, because we're supposed to be wrapping up within an hour or so. But I took I'm in the field right now, currently, in education, but I'm more specifically in the technologies. So I'm in curriculum. So I'm in K through 12 education, and helping to basically renew or even come up with new curriculum for K through 12.
What is the name of your program is the question.
And that includes technology. So
if you can sum it all up, and they say, okay, you're going to pick this program, that program, or that one. Which one did you pick?
So I picked instructional technology in K through 12 curriculum. So the education that I'm in is specific to K through 12 schooling or schools.
So our next topic here is 40 acres and a mule. So how is 40 acres and a mule related to reparations?
Exactly.
Is the two like one and the same? Because we hear that thrown out there as well. That's been around for the longest. And Do you have any
Right.
knowledge on that topic?
Well, when you say it's been around for the longest, well, I don't know, but 1865 was when that was enacted,
That's
and
a popular term, 40 acres and a mule. I mean,
okay,
I mean it's used a lot. It's a slogan.
right.
Right.
So, I mean, 40 acres and a mule, that's pretty exciting, I
It's
guess.
is an example. Is there a way that that
If we could
brown
all get 40
or
acres and a
people of
mule,
color can people of
I think
color
I'd be,
uh,
calling that reparation and pretty
is
satisfied.
there a pathway? Can how could people out there go about claiming that promise, that 40 acres and a mule? Is that a law? Is it into law? Um, how could people out there who are listening go and get their 40 acres and a mule? Because I
Well,
got mine. No, I'm just
exactly.
kidding.
Well,
What's the process?
it seems like those are good questions, but the fact that, you've heard that term and it is law, that, it's worth looking into. So I would just suggest to the listeners to look into it. What is 40 acres and a mule, and what are those laws surrounding that phrase?
Well, the key is President Lincoln was the president that promised that. So you want to start there and work your way down. Yes, it's documented, and yes, it's there, and yes, there's a way to claim that. So I encourage all of you out there to go look that promise up, that law that is written, and go about claiming that. The next topic is, think about it, paying to or otherwise who have been wronged. So reparations include paying money to or otherwise someone who have been wronged. There's a lot of people that are wronged each day, right? But we're going back to
But we're speaking
slave
to specifically
or
been received injustice by the United States government. So that's a little bit more specific and a little bit more maybe in depth and controversial.
But here's the thing, that's general, right? When you say that, right? Because we know that the people up in Congress or the Senate and the judicial or executive branch, they're not the ones that are actually doing people wrong. So there's an
Okay,
aspect
right.
to how that's happening depending on what factors, right? And that those are the ones that we want to like focus on. So
Okay.
how would you say that?
Well, just to kind of on a lighter note, mention something. Um, the eldest daughter,
Hmm. You have kids.
yes, my eldest daughter,
Uh-huh.
one day, went to school. She's in middle school. Came home and she said, "Mommy, today we had in our social studies class, we had to get around in our circle, and the teacher had to come to each of us and ask us, each one of us, to imagine that we were in the position of the President of the United States of America, and that when she got around to each one, that she wanted them to give her an answer as to what is the one thing that you would do as the United States of America that would change or be different from what you see today." And my eldest daughter was one of two who said the same thing. So I don't know if they had the same idea or whatever. So that was part of the story as well. But
What did she say?
she told her response was to her teacher, that she would make two things free for all Americans: housing and food. meaning everything else was up for, marketing, but there would be no more housing market. It would just be
Houses, right?
just
Like,
be yeah,
not apartments,
just
right?
everybody needs a house, so they get one.
Okay. That makes sense.
And
But
of
they would
course,
still have to pay bills, right?
everybody needs food, so they get food.
They still
And
would have to
everybody
pay
needs
bills,
clothing,
right?
so they get clothing.
What are they
And
going to pay? What happens to all the
and
businesses?
everything else, though, like products and technology and
Okay.
anything and everything,
Okay.
services,
Well,
everything else is marketed.
that eliminates
So
all the
basically,
real estate
the
moguls.
three basic human needs, right? Shelter, clothing, and food, are free for every American.
Or given,
Mhm.
basically.
Mhm.
So I wonder how that would change the dynamics of a lot of things. Would you have people working now that they have all their basic needs met? Would businesses thrive more so? Would there be competition, so on and so forth? So that's an interesting thought for a child to think of that.
Exactly, and that would be kind of like reparations for coming from that perspective of a middle school government class talking about
Wow.
reparations.
And I see that being done to a certain fashion, and we can talk about some of those programs that are out there that are considered like a form of reparation, but the ones that we're talking about is the ones that close the gaps as opposed to make them further wider. So with that being said, the next topic that is on the list is, will reparations make things worse? And I kind of like said
Just
that,
said that.
right?
Mhm.
There
Yeah.
is some programs that are actually considered a form of reparation, but it's actually making matters worse. Well, we know about that, right? Well, they have food assistance for needy families, right? Which is fine, right? But what happens, right? There's restrictions, limits, and there's a framework that is placed with that. So it's almost like a box, right? You go into that box and you're there in that box until you decide to come out of the box or whatever. And that's how your life would be. So would that be closing the gap? No.
Well,
So we can say,
there is a difference though between the government providing those things and it being a fundamental part of a community. In other words, if shelter and houses and or shelter and food and clothing were a fundamentally free thing within the American communities, then it would be you just walk outside and you have available food. You just, walk up to your house.
how would
It
that
sounds like
be?
a paradise, really.
Yes.
And so I think that's really kind of the difference is your starts with like more like on a community level, less on the putting the pressure on like the United States government to provide, programs for that because they already have actually.
And not only that, that is more costly than what is being provided to, or what is being presented today, right? We're talking about the new millennial reparation aspect where there is a payment to those individuals, which gets into the next topic of reparations are for descendants of blacks or people of color. So so we're talking about something like, okay, every person of color who are from America receives a check in the mail or direct deposit, right? Almost like in the form of like a stimulus, but that one big check. Now the numbers were 42 million, right? That's like pennies in a bag when you're talking about big money, right? These are not trillions of dollars. We're
And if
talking
you think about it,
$42
you
million.
say 42 million. You know what? I think that would be
Awesome.
almost every. To be honest with you, the way I have researched that
42
topic
million.
of reparations concerning specific to
People of color.
descendants of blacks
If you're
in
from
America, that would be just the same as we all have a percentage of Native American blood. Well,
They're probably going to
we
say
all
it
have
has to be at least
some roots
50% maybe.
somewhere in our family, black blood.
Uh-huh.
So
So let's see you
that
guys
would
out there.
be-
Someone take the lead.
that would be speaking for
42 million.
the same way.
That's
in
all
the
it would
same way.
cost to make things right. Okay. So the next thing would be what America owes. What would reparation look like? We kind of just talked about that. $42 million. Sent in the form of a stimulus packet. Not packet, but a stimulus direct deposit.
And also,
or
I
in the
say
mail.
that too because
$1 million
my
each.
3 children are mixed with black blood.
They are?
So,
How so?
and that's just one example, or 3 examples, but one.
Are they
you know,
being counted? That's the question.
And so, I mean, if that's a fact, and it is, then, it's happened in our past in the United States, or, so meaning, the, as a matter of fact, it's happened in my family history where the wealthy plantation owners, sons and daughters of the plantation owners mixed and mingled with the
People of color.
the owned slaves
So then I have
that
a
were
question.
on the plantation, working on the plantation.
While we're on
And
this
then
topic.
there was mixing and a mingling of them, and of course came, in some cases, offspring. And then
So with that being said, have you mentioned earlier that your children are mixed, and so did that ever occur to you? Was this something that you always wanted to do, like have children by a person of color, or
no.
so?
No.
You want to tell us about that? How
No,
that happened?
but it's not like now that they're here, I'm, viewing it one way or the other. As a matter of fact, I view it, I do view it a different way. Had I not had children of color or mixed children.
So what brought you to that aspect of wanting to have children, but better yet, like of color, right? And then not only that, especially what you mentioned about how you were brought up to where there was some differences in opinions, maybe about, you mentioned coming up in the South, you mentioned your relatives did the segregation aspect. So how does all that play a role into your childbearing as well as even now?
Well, for
And being a
one,
mother.
people from the South, no matter what, what roots you come from, if you're from the South, you most likely you're going to be more conservative than you would be, otherwise. And so coming up in all of that, being raised around that, I do have very conservative views. So, I mean, that affects people's, life choices, and it affects how they view other people's life choices. But they,
So would that mean when you were younger, right? So how old were you when you had your first child?
Well, I did start later in life to have children. Well, you know, I would have started younger, but I put my education first. So, you know, I was in my 30s when I,
At your first
yeah.
child. Okay, so with that being said, um, when you had your first child, and did any of that change your perspective, knowing that how you were brought up or whatnot? Did that at some point ever occur that you would see yourself? I mean, looking at it then and looking at it now, well, how do you view the whole aspect of it all?
Well, like I said, no, it's not something I planned. It's not like I planned to have, you know, my children be mixed. And it's not like I thought that's what would be and what would happen. Um, so, you know, that is true, but you know, because I'm 40 something now, you know, I was around, I mean, I was schooled after segregation, but my parents were the ones who experienced segregation in their schooling. And so, you know, yeah, there was that. But by the time I got to school,
Okay, so then I have a
that wasn't an
question.
issue.
So,
And then, as far as the kids being segregated, now I went to a middle class school all my life, you know, or, you know, as a child, the public schools I went to were middle class and mostly made up of European students and were white. And but it wasn't uncommon to see, you know, a black student or an Asian student or a Mexican student, you know, down
so,
in the South. And that's just how it was
so how does it
for
feel?
me.
How does it feel for you, right? So
But I
your
will tell you
entire
that
family.
that one black student felt left out because they were only one out of the whole class. I do remember things like
That's what
that.
I was gonna ask you.
I do feel like
Actually,
I do remember, and I remember seeing that they not only felt left out, like they didn't fit in with
I
everybody
could see
because
that.
they were the only one,
I can
but
see that.
they really did kind of not fit in with the average statistics, like the geographical background of an average student that I was, you know, around, because they were living in poverty, whereas the rest of the students were living in like middle class
Okay.
brackets.
So two things. One being your entire extended family is white or European of some sort. You broke a trend or set a trend for your family, right? Because you're the only one that had mixed children out of your
No,
entire family.
no, well, I knew others
In your family, like your extended
that
family.
were close to our family,
No,
that were friends of my family that did. And
but
then
not your family.
my fifth grandfather from Canada was the son of the wealthy slave owner, or not
Okay.
slave owner, but property owner.
So,
And he mingled with his mother's slaves, and he met a young black slave girl,
mhm.
and they had offspring. So I
So,
do have that in my blood,
well,
and
so
I
my question is,
have that. It's
by
just
you,
that one,
yes,
right?
but by you being the only
And that
one,
one time it happened, right?
yes.
But now here again,
How do
in
you?
this generation, 5 generations later, and this is all on my paternal side that occurred, but here again, and the fifth generation later, I have mixed my blood again with
So
with blacks
so when you look
or with the black.
when you
So
look
then my children.
when you look across your whole extended family right now, you're the only one that has the children that are mixed. So my question to you would be, how does that feel to be the only one? Do you get picked on?
Well, no,
Do
there
people
no there was
like
like I said, there was there I have my great grandfather who mixed. Now those children though are obviously like hidden away from the family because there's no nobody, like they were probably raised by the slave girl, and the slave girl has very little documentation in and of itself. So
so do you
these
feel
black children that were in my family before me were raised by their black half, and were not necessarily even seen by the my French Canadian grandfather's half of his family. So
so do you get
they
picked
were
on?
hidden. They were hidden from that. So basically, maybe I view it now as, well, they're supposed to be like that way, like if they're mixed, or maybe it depends on how you follow the genealogy. If the genealogy follows a slave, then that's usually where the children are raised. Because I could say it's paternal or maternal, but she was a black slave girl, and she was the one that raised the black children
So
in my family.
so by you
And
being
he was the Canadian French white side. So I can't say it's the father's side that takes on the mixed children or the colored children.
so my question is, were you picked on being
So
the only one?
I'm actually opening up that whole discussion, because a lot of people, I think I've heard you mention that when you're dealing with mixing races and offspring, and specifically, that's Rosie, and specifically blacks and whites mixing for marriage and child having children.
Excuse me for the background noise. Kim, you're watching Global News. Actually, you're listening to Global News Podcast. Here we're talking about the topic reparations for all people of color in the United States. And we have co-host Rebecca here. And I'm, of
And I guess
course,
that means I have some color, but my color would be, what color am I? Purple, brown? What's the color that's in my blood? And
Eric,
so
and
I'm like, the Native American. But yes, so I could go into those things because it's all about genealogy at that point when you're talking about the children in your families, and what side do they get cared for on, mostly, because I think I've heard you say things like,
in other words, do you have
when
any
you're dealing
racist
with mother
relatives?
whites,
That's
whites
my
and
question.
blacks mixing, you follow the paternal side as to where the children, what culture the children are acculturated into. But I actually sort of disagree, because I view it as more of a genealogical thing. And in doing so, genealogically, that's not necessarily necessarily the case. But aside from that, it is interesting. That whole thing is an interesting topic for me because of my 3 children. And, I have done some extensive research in that area. And in the United States, they are now identified as their own race. So if there is a mixing of specifically the black race and the white race,
People of color.
or what is known as, or what people speak of as the black race and the white race, which is really, to me, African and European, then they are making up and made up their own race, and it's called mulatto, the mulatto race.
So have you?
And that is a real race,
called,
and it's a presence in the United States and elsewhere.
Have you been picked on because of your mixed kids by anybody in your family or anyone that you may associate with or be around that has strong views about that? Because coming from the South, as you mentioned, and I understand, things, you have no control of how people think and things like that. Have you ever experienced those things?
When you say picked on, I'm
Yeah.
not sure if you mean like a certain thing or not, but I do know this.
Calling, you
No,
made
no.
bad decisions
Well, no.
or bad choices.
No, I mean, even if I
all
name
those
called,
type of things.
that wasn't them name calling, that was me. But I
said you
I
shouldn't
do
have.
remember this as far as anything like that. I do remember growing up hearing the word, the N word, and not knowing that it was a bad word. But then later finding out it wasn't really a bad word, like going through this whole phase of, well, you can't use the N word because your skin is white or light or
Do you know
whatever.
why they
your skin is
made
white, so you
that
can't
law?
use the N word. And I said, well, why? I
you
didn't
know why they
understand.
made
And
that
this
law?
was later in life. And then I said, well, but what is it? And okay, and it kind of just was like, okay, it was just whatever thing. And then it became, well, you can use it if you're using it properly.
Question. Do
And
you know why
so
they made
I
that
said,
law?
well, now that I have, children that are mixed with black, I'm allowed to use this N word or whatever, but it matters in what context you use it. It matters. Are you using it for bad? Are you using it to harm somebody? Because if so, then you obviously don't know what it means.
Do
And
you know why they-
likewise, the N word is not just the only word, that people misuse
Do you-
and
do you know why they made that
or
law?
misunderstand and then misuse.
Uh-huh. Do you
So,
know
and
why
I
they make
teach, I teach them mostly, words, but the N word I don't necessarily teach them because I am, white or lighter skinned than them. But if it ever became an issue with them, like I don't hear it being an issue. Like they don't come home from school, and my oldest is 13, and she's never, ever, ever, not once, ever come home from school and told me, Mommy, someone called me the N word today. So now if they come to me and they tell me, something like that happened or something like that, then I would, discuss it and explain things. But nothing
Okay.
like that has happened.
Okay. Well, the next topic is why reparations are needed for people of color, which we kind of already talked about, closing the gap. Now, has it been challenging raising or being at odds with your situation as far as having 3 children of color and most of the views, or maybe do you sometimes feel like you're like at odds or outnumbered or don't belong or maybe you just need to be more around people
No,
that are like you?
I have met some women who are like me, who are whiter, light skinned, and identify as a European or Caucasian or white, and yet they have black children or colored children or mixed children. And it is and can be a little bit of a racial tension between,
In the household.
between blacks and whites in general when they see that out in public. And they recognize that, those mothers that and ladies and women that are in similar situation as myself, they recognize that, but they don't obsess with it or emphasize it. They don't emphasize it because they know they're just there, being a mother, and they're just there to raise their children. And to them, a mother's love goes beyond the color of their children's skin or their skin.
So
So
how do you protect that?
they don't let it, the issues of race and the issues of black and white bother them to the point to where it's a problem. So I see it as a whole race of its own, the mulatto race. And that's really what it is. They are becoming and have become and are a race of their own. And that's, I think that's a good thing. I think that, and I'm a mother of them. So I think I do know these things intuitively as well. And that's a good thing.
So
And then there's the mestiza race, which I've also done some research on. But these are topics that are all, topics that can be talked about in more depth separately from reparations. But at the same time, you know, if you classify mulatto and mestiza with descendants of blacks, and that's going to be something that needs to be discussed. And as far as reparations, then they would be also
descendants.
included in that topic or discussion. So that's why I mention
Yes.
the mulatto race in the United States and globally.
So where's the father of your children? And
Well,
I mean,
actually, I was married to a black man for 13 years. So, on top of having mixed mulatto children, I have experienced being, living, and being married to a black person. So, you know,
person of color.
I can speak on it, because of my experiences in life with that. So, yeah.
Do you think about do you think about him sometimes, or you know?
Well, now that I was separated, and then the marriage did end in a divorce, there's this there's that really, but what I think being experienced with the black race and being married to a black man is that these things are things that every culture does experience, but I think it's become maybe something that needs to be, because like I said, you don't hear reparation being talked about. You may hear, but you don't hear it being talked about. So likewise, people, they see these things, but they don't talk about them. They see the issues of black and white,
So we're talking
but they don't
about it.
talk about
This is
them.
where we
They
talk about all
see
that stuff.
mixed children. They see a mulatto race. They see white mothers and black fathers, or white fathers and black mothers, but they don't talk about it. So that's really kind of what I think about when I think about my children's father as a black man, and and then also other families that are similar to having a white mother and a black father.
Okay, well, that will do it for today. We are wrapping things up here at Global News Podcast with co-host Rebecca, and I am Eric, of course. And we will see you again back with another topic. I believe we're going to be going over gentrification. This is something that is happening now here in the United States as we speak, and it has grown. You're seeing it all around the United States, in urban areas. And is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Well, you'll find out. Stay tuned for the next episode, Global News Podcast. And by the way, you can check out our YouTube channel, like and subscribe. Global News Podcast. Thank you and have a great day.